In the shadowed basement of the North Dakota State Museum lies a strip of human skin, 16 inches long, taken from a fallen soldier at the Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876, a chilling testament to a brutal clash that reshaped the American West. Trooper William C. Slapper witnessed horrors that day: bodies hacked apart, a knife driven through a man's eye, and unspeakable acts committed in the chaos. Yet this relic, tied to the life and death of Isaiah Dorman, a black interpreter caught between worlds, holds secrets beyond its grim origins. Why was this skin preserved, and what does it reveal about the collision of cultures on that fateful day? Stay with us to uncover the haunting truth. Deep in the basement of the North Dakota State Museum, hidden from public view, lies a relic that chills the soul. It is a strip of human skin, 16 inches long and 2 inches wide, darkened to a leather-like texture by time. This grim artifact, part of the Burdick collection of Teton Lakota Sioux ethnological materials, was gathered between the 1920s and 1930s, a period when the American West was still being mythologized. Unlike the beaded moccasins or feathered headdresses in the collection, this strip stands apart, a stark reminder of a violent past. Its very existence forces us to face a difficult truth. History is not just stories of triumph or tragedy, but sometimes a tangible, unsettling remnant of human suffering. Museums today, wary of displaying such macabre objects, keep it locked away, yet its preservation speaks to its power. According to historian D. Brown in his 1970 book Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, artifacts like these challenge us to confront the raw realities of the Indian Wars, where cultural clashes left scars on both land and memory. Why do we preserve such a relic, and what does it demand of us as we unravel its story? This strip of skin was taken from the body of Isaiah Dorman, a black scout and interpreter who met his end on the 25th of June, 1876, during the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Dorman was not a soldier, yet he found himself in the heart of one of the most infamous conflicts in American history. The act of removing his skin was not a random act of violence, but a deliberate ritual by the Lakota Sioux, rooted in their spiritual traditions. Historian Robert M. Utley, in his 1984 work The Indian Frontier, notes that such practices were often misunderstood by 19th-century Americans, who labeled them as savage without grasping their cultural weight. For the Lakota, taking a piece of the fallen could serve as part of a death ceremony, a way to honor or process the chaos of battle. This artifact, then, is not merely a trophy of war, but a bridge to understanding a worldview far removed from the U.S. Army's blank pride. It challenges the narrative, so often repeated in early accounts like those in the New York Herald of 1876, that painted Native actions as barbaric. Instead, it asks us to see the humanity and ritual behind the act, even in the midst of bloodshed. The skin found its way into the hands of Usher L. Burdick, a man whose life intertwined with the history of the Great Plains. Burdick, born in 1879, served as a lawyer, North Dakota's lieutenant governor from 1933 to 1935, and a U.S. representative from 1935 to 1945 and 1949 to 1959. His passion for collecting Native American artifacts began in his youth, growing up near the Fort Totten Sioux Reservation, where he learned to speak the Sioux dialect fluently. By the 1930s, his collection numbered over 5,000 items, including tools, clothing, and ceremonial objects, now housed in the North Dakota State Museum. This strip of skin, acquired in 1932, stands out among them, not for its beauty, but for its grim significance. Burdick's work preserved a wealth of Lakota history, yet it raises a thorny question. Does collecting such an object honor the past or exploit it? Historian Philip J. Deloria, in his 1998 book Playing Indian, argues that white collectors like Burdick often walked a fine line, preserving Native culture while commodifying it for a settler audience. The artifact, then, is not just a relic of 1876, but a mirror reflecting our ongoing struggle to respectfully steward Native histories. The Battle of the Little Bighorn, fought on the 25th of June and 26, 1876, left a landscape soaked in blood and littered with horrors. When the dust settled along the banks of the Little Bighorn River, the bodies of U.S. soldiers lay scattered across the Montana plains, many mutilated beyond recognition. Corporal Henry Scullin, a member of the 7th Cavalry, suffered a gruesome fate, His leg was hacked off near the groin, leaving a jagged wound that spoke of the battle's ferocity. Another soldier, unnamed in surviving accounts, had both arms severed at the shoulders, a brutal testament to the close-quarters combat that defined the day. Most chilling, Henry Jim Turley, a cavalryman, was found with his own large hunting knife driven through his eye, the blade buried to the hilt. These details come from Trooper William C. Slapper, who survived the battle and recounted the carnage to later chroniclers. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick, in his 2010 book, The Last Stand, estimates that over 260 soldiers from the 7th Cavalry perished, with many subjected to post-mortem mutilation. Such acts were not random but carried deep meaning for the victors, a point often lost in early reports, like those in the Chicago Tribune of July 1876, which sensationalized Native actions as mere savagery. The violence, however, was not one-sided. It was a clash of worlds, each side driven by survival and vengeance. Isaiah Dorman, the Black Scout and interpreter, met an especially grim end. His body, discovered among the fallen, was pierced with numerous arrows, some lodged in his head, others in his torso. Deep slashes marred his flesh, and he endured what survivors called unmentionable atrocities. A haunting detail stands out. A coffee mug, which Dorman always carried, was placed beside his corpse, filled with his own blood. This image, recorded by a soldier who helped bury the dead, carries a weight that lingers. Historian Gregory Michno, in his 1997 work, Lakota Noon, suggests that such acts by Sioux women were symbolic, possibly a ritual of retribution for loved ones lost to U.S. military campaigns. The Sioux and Cheyenne had faced years of encroachment treaty violations like the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty, broken by gold seekers in the Black Hills, drove their resistance. Dorman's mutilation, then, was not just violence but a response to a broader war of dispossession. This perspective challenges us to see the battle not as a simple defeat of Custer's men but as a cycle of retaliation, where both sides inflicted and endured profound loss. The Sioux and Cheyenne warriors, numbering over 1,500 fighters according to historian John S. Gray's 1991 study Custer's Last Campaign, overwhelmed the 7th Cavalry's roughly 600 men. Their victory was not just a matter of numbers, but of strategy and resolve, as they fought to protect a village of thousands along the Little Bighorn River. Women, too, played a vital role in the aftermath. After the battle, Sioux women moved among the fallen, wielding pemmican hammers, wooden tools used to pound dried meat to desecrate the bodies of soldiers like Dorman. This act, shocking to Western observers, was rooted in cultural practice. Historian Thomas Powers, in his 2010 book, The Killing of Crazy Horse, notes that such rituals were expressions of grief and defiance, as Native communities mourned their own dead, estimated at 30 to 100 warriors. The involvement of women upends stereotypes of passive roles in warfare, revealing a communal effort where entire villages stood united against U.S. expansion. By 1876, the U.S. Army had established 14 forts in the Dakota Territory alone, a statistic from the National Park Service, signaling relentless pressure on native lands. The actions of the Sioux and Cheyenne, including their women, were not mere cruelty but a desperate stand to preserve their way of life. Isaiah Dorman was born free from slavery, a rare status for a black man in the early 19th century. His mother had secured her freedom years before his birth, granting him a life unburdened by chains but not by the era's deep racial divides. By 1853, at around age 30, Dorman was working at Fort Ridgely in Minnesota, a frontier outpost built to protect settlers and facilitate U.S. expansion. There, he labored on construction projects, helping erect the fort's wooden stockades and stone buildings, which stood as symbols of American ambition in Dakota Territory. Historian John D. McDermott, in his 2003 book Red Cloud's War, notes that Fort Ridgely was a hub for over 200 soldiers and civilians by the 1850s, a place where diverse lives intersected. Dorman's presence as a free black man in this volatile region marked him as an outlier, navigating a world where racial and cultural boundaries were rigidly enforced. His early years reveal a man carving out a place in a frontier that offered opportunity but also danger, setting the stage for his unique role as a bridge between cultures. Dorman's life took a profound turn when he chose to live among the Lakota, a decision that shaped his identity and destiny. In the 1850s, he joined the Teton Lakota Sioux, engaging in trading and trapping along the Missouri River's vast network, which stretched over 2,300 miles and served as a lifeline for commerce. He married a Dakota woman named Celeste Pierre, though some records suggest her name may have been visible, possibly a translation of a Dakota term. This union tied Dorman to the Lakota community, where he learned their language and customs, living among them in encampments that could number up to 1,000 people, according to anthropologist Raymond J. W. Damali's 2001 study, The Sioux in the 19th Century. His integration was not superficial. He built a life within their social fabric, sharing meals of pemmican and participating in the rhythms of camp life. Historian Pekka Hämäläinen, in his 2019 book Lakota America, argues that such cross-cultural figures were vital to the Plains economy, acting as intermediaries in a world of trade and tension. Dorman's marriage and life with the Lakota made him a liminal figure, neither fully settler nor native, complicating the simplistic us versus them narrative of the Indian Wars. Dorman's skills as a cultural intermediary led him to a series of roles that blended military and civilian life. During the Civil War, from 1861 to 1865, he served as a personal attendant to General Alfred Sully, a U.S. Army officer stationed at Fort Kearny in Nebraska, a post that housed over 300 soldiers by 1863, per National Park Service records. Dorman accompanied Sully into battles in Virginia, where the Union and Confederacy clashed in campaigns that claimed over 600,000 lives. In 1864, he joined Sully. On the 25th of June, 1876, the sun rose over the Little Bighorn River in Montana, casting light on a sprawling Sioux and Cheyenne village that stretched across the valley. Isaiah Dorman, a black interpreter, rode with Major Marcus Reno's battalion of 175 men from the 7th Cavalry, tasked with attacking this encampment of over 7,000 people, including 500 to 2,000 warriors, as estimated by historian John S. Gray in his 1991 book Custer's Last Campaign. The village was a vibrant hub of tipis, families, and livestock, a defiant stand against U.S. encroachment. As Reno's men charged, the warriors responded with ferocious precision, riding swiftly among the soldiers, their war clubs swinging with lethal force. The air filled with the crack of rifles and the cries of men, as the cavalry's formation crumbled under the onslaught. By noon, Reno's troops, overwhelmed and suffering heavy losses, retreated to a nearby timber, scrambling to hold their ground. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick, in his 2010 book The Last Stand, describes this moment as a tactical masterstroke by the Sioux and Cheyenne, whose knowledge of the terrain and coordinated resistance shattered the Army's confidence. The chaos of this clash was not a mere massacre, as often portrayed in 19th century newspapers like the New York Times, but a desperate defense of a way of life under siege, with the U.S. Army's 14 forts in Dakota Territory by 1876, per National Park Service records, signaling relentless pressure on native lands. In the midst of this chaos, Isaiah Dorman faced his final moments. His horse was shot out from under him, leaving him stranded as Reno's men fled. Standing alone on the blood-soaked ground, Dorman fired his weapon at the approaching warriors, a last act of defiance. As Private Roman Rutten galloped past, Dorman shouted, "Goodbye, Rutten," a farewell recorded by survivors and later recounted in military reports. This fleeting moment, preserved in the 1876 testimony of 7th Cavalry survivors, reveals Dorman's courage and isolation, a man caught between worlds with nowhere to run. Historian James Donovan, in his 2008 book A Terrible Glory, notes that interpreters like Dorman were often left vulnerable, neither fully soldier nor civilian, their roles critical, yet exposing them to the battle's full fury. Rutten's memory of Dorman's words humanizes a man who, despite his Lakota ties, faced death as an outsider in the eyes of the warriors. The retreat left behind not just Dorman, but a fractured sense of loyalty, as the Army's hasty withdrawal severed bonds forged in the heat of battle. When the fighting ceased, the bodies of Dorman and civilian scout Charlie Reynolds were found side by side, as if bound by a shared fate. A soldier tasked with burying the dead, quoted in Gregory Micknow's 1997 book Lakota Noon, described the scene. Dorman's body was riddled with arrows, slashed deeply, and pounded by Sioux women wielding pemmican hammers, wooden tools typically used to prepare dried meat. This act of desecration, shocking to Western sensibilities, carried profound meaning. The Sioux, having lost an estimated 30 to 100 warriors per historian Thomas Powers in his 2010 book The Killing of Crazy Horse, mourned their own through rituals that expressed both grief and defiance. The mutilation of Dorman's body was not random cruelty, but a response to years of violence, including the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaties violation, which fueled native resistance when gold seekers flooded the Black Hills. Historian Pekka Hämäläinen, in Lakota America, 2019, argues that such acts were communal, involving women and elders, reflecting a collective stand against annihilation. To judge them solely as barbaric, as 1876 accounts in the Chicago Tribune did, is to ignore the cultural lens through which the Sioux processed their losses. From Dorman's mutilated body, a strip of skin, 16 inches long and 2 inches wide, was taken by Iron Antelope, the niece of Dorman's wife, Celeste Pierre. This act was not one of trophy-taking but part of a Lakota death ceremony, a ritual to honor the fallen and ensure their passage to the spirit world. Anthropologist Raymond J. Damali, in his 2001 study The Sioux in the 19th Century, explains that such practices were sacred, rooted in beliefs about death and renewal, often involving the preservation of a small part of the deceased. Iron Antelope's action reflects Dorman's complex ties to the Lakota, a man who lived among them, spoke their language, and married into their community. By taking the skin, she ensured his memory endured in a way that aligned with Lakota traditions, not U.S. Army values. This reframes the artifact as a sacred object, not a grisly relic, challenging Eurocentric views that dominated early histories, like those in John F. Finerty's 1890 book Warpath and Bivouac. The strip of skin, later passed to Iron Antelope's son, Afraid of Lightning, became a tangible link to both Dorman's life and the Lakota's resilience in the face of overwhelming loss. In 1932, Afraid of Lightning sold the strip of skin, along with other Lakota items, to Usher L. Burdick, a collector whose passion for native artifacts shaped his legacy. Burdick, born in 1879 and raised near the Fort Totten Sioux Reservation, spoke the Sioux dialect fluently and amassed over 5,000 objects by the 1930s, now housed in the North Dakota State Museum. His acquisition of the skin, however, raises troubling questions. Was this an act of preservation or exploitation? Historian Philip J. Deloria, in his 1998 book Playing Indian, argues that collectors like Burdick often blurred the line, safeguarding native culture while turning sacred objects into commodities for white audiences. The sale, likely driven by economic hardship by 1932, the Great Depression had devastated native communities, with unemployment rates on reservations reaching 70%, per Bureau of Indian Affairs records, underscores the unequal power dynamics of the time. Burdick's fluency in Sioux dialects and his proximity to the Fort Totten Reservation, home to over 1,000 Dakota by the 1930s, gave him access to such items, but it also placed him in a position of privilege. The artifact, now a museum piece, carries the weight of this transaction, a reminder of both the Lakota's cultural depth and the ethical complexities of preserving their history. The strip of skin, once part of Isaiah Dorman's body, now rests in the North Dakota State Museum, a silent witness to a turbulent past. It is one of over 5,000 items in the Burdick collection, assembled by Usher L. Burdick, a man whose life was deeply tied to the Great Plains. Born in 1879, Burdick grew up near the Fort Totten Sioux Reservation, where he learned to speak the Sioux dialect fluently, a skill that set him apart in a region where cultural divides ran deep. As a lawyer, North Dakota's lieutenant governor from 1933 to 1935, and a U.S. representative for 2 terms totaling 14 years, Burdick used his influence to amass a vast array of Lakota Sioux artifacts, including tools, clothing, and ceremonial objects. By the 1930s, his collection had become one of the largest of its kind, preserving a wealth of native history at a time when the U.S. government's policies, such as the 1887 Dawes Act, had reduced native landholdings by over 90 million acres, according to historian Frederick E. 24. Hoxie in his 1984 book A Final Promise. Burdick's efforts ensured that objects like the strip of skin survived, offering historians and scholars like D. Brown, author of the 1970 book Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, a tangible link to the Indian Wars. Yet, his collection raises a persistent question. Who has the right to own and display such items? The debate, as historian Philip J. Deloria notes in his 1998 work Playing Indian, centers on whether such collections preserve Native heritage or exploit it for settler curiosity, a tension that lingers in modern museum practices. This artifact, a 16-inch by 2-inch strip of human skin, embodies the brutal realities of the Indian Wars and the profound cultural practices of the Lakota Sioux. Taken by Iron Antelope in 1876 for a Lakota death ceremony, it was not a mere relic of violence but a sacred object meant to honor Dorman's complex ties to the Lakota community. Anthropologist Raymond J. DeMalley, in his 2001 study, The Sioux in the 19th Century, explains that such rituals were rooted in Lakota beliefs about death and the afterlife, where preserving a part of the deceased ensured their spirit's journey. The skin, passed to Iron Antelope's son, afraid of lightning, carried this spiritual weight until it sailed to Burdick in 1932. In the North Dakota State Museum, it now sits alongside other Lakota artifacts, viewed by fewer than 100,000 annual visitors per museum records, a far cry from the bustling encampments of over 7,000 Sioux and Cheyenne at Little Bighorn. Its display, however, risks reducing a sacred act to a grim curiosity, a point raised by historian Pekka Hämäläinen in Lakota America, 2019. Who argues that Western institutions often strip Native objects of their cultural context. The artifact's story demands a careful balance. It reflects the violence of a conflict that killed over 260 U.S. soldiers and 30 to 100 Native warriors, per historian Nathaniel Philbrick's 2010 book, The Last Stand, but also the Lakota's resilience in maintaining their traditions amid existential threats. The journey of this strip of skin from a Lakota ceremony to a museum shelf reveals a deeper truth about history's complexities. Dorman, a black man who lived among the Lakota, married a Dakota woman, and served the U.S. Army, was neither fully insider nor outsider, his life a testament to the fluid identities of the frontier. The artifact, preserved through Lakota ritual and later commodified by Burdick's purchase, mirrors this duality. It speaks to the violence of 1876, when the U.S. Army's campaign to subdue the Plains tribes culminated in a battle that shocked the nation. Yet, it also carries the Lakota's spiritual strength, rooted in centuries of tradition. Historian Thomas Powers, in his 2010 book, The Killing of Crazy Horse, emphasizes that objects like this challenge us to see Native resistance, not as savagery, but as a fight for survival against a U.S. government that, by 1876, had established 14 forts in Dakota Territory alone, per National Park Service data. Today, as museums grapple with repatriation, over 200,000 Native remains and artifacts remain in U.S. institutions. According to the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act of 1990, the strip of skin stands as a call to rethink how we honor the past. It is not just a relic, but a bridge to understanding the Lakota's enduring legacy and the cost of a war that reshaped the American West. The strip of skin, taken in a moment of grief and ritual, stands as a haunting bridge between Isaiah Dorman's life, the Lakota's resistance, and the brutal cost of the Indian Wars. With profound respect for the Native peoples who fought to protect their way of life, we are left to ponder. How do we honor the stories of those, like Dorman and the Lakota, caught in the crossfire of history's collisions, ensuring their voices echo beyond the artifacts they left behind?